Hi, everyone. This is Daniel. Welcome to Built by Educators. I am here with Daryl Williams Jr., and we're talking about teacher retention. Now, a short intro for Daryl. He is the founder of Pursuit of Excellence, where he helps school districts retain new teachers by building confidence before burnout sets in. He describes himself as, quote, a former terrible teacher turned two-time teacher of the year. Now, Daryl's core message is this: new teachers don't quit because they can't teach, they quit because they stop believing they can. He's the creator of the System Before Strategy framework, which focuses on identity, mindset, and confidence before instructional strategies. And he is the author of the Impact Playbook for New Teachers. And he's currently working on another book, You've Got What It Takes, about developing grit,
Absolutely.
confidence, and resilience. He's a husband, a father, fitness enthusiast. He's a lifelong learner who believes that excellence is pursued, not achieved. Daryl, welcome. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Man, Daniel, I'm excited. Every time I hear the intro, I'm like, man, I guess that is me. It's sometimes it's tough, but thank you so much for having me, man.
Yeah. No, it sounds like it's been quite a journey, and I kind of want to start off at the beginning. You describe yourself as a former terrible teacher. These are your words, and then turn two-time teacher of the year. So, kind of take us back. Like, uh, what did your teaching look like early on, and what specifically would you say in reflection did you see wasn't working in the classroom?
Man, yeah, I am a self-proclaimed terrible teacher, but it was obvious not just to me, but to everybody around me. Okay, I started teaching in 2014, and I had no idea what I was doing. I can remember coming into the classroom. I didn't know how to manage the class at all. Students were up, they were running around, they were doing a worm on the floor. It was just a whole mess. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. So much so that I was teaching seventh grade math when I first began. And I had about 31 students in the classroom. And at the beginning of year assessment, they were on a fifth, sixth grade level. By mid year assessment time, they were on a fourth, fifth grade level. Like, they were going backwards. So I'm telling you, it was bad. And I ended up quitting quitting mentally 6 weeks in when I said, I just can't do this anymore. I'm not good enough. I shouldn't be here. I should be doing something else. And at the end of that first year, I really thought about not coming back. I said, this isn't for me. I'm going to go to a different career. I started applying at Target. I really was like, this is just not for me. So when I say I was a terrible teacher, I think the reason why that stands out is because 6 weeks in, when I quit mentally, I gave up on students. And I don't think you can be a good teacher if you're giving up on students. I think even bad teachers try to show up for students. The reason why I say I was a terrible teacher is because I quit on them. I gave up. I said, I'm not good enough. You don't deserve it. I'm going to stop trying.
That's huge. One of the first books I remember reading in my teacher education program was Parker Palmer's Courage to Teach. And to me, it's a long book that basically says you have to know yourself before you teach others. And you have to
Yep.
deeply know yourself. And, I started teaching right out of grad school. I was young, thought I knew myself. I feel like so much of it is about that. Like, you get to know yourself through teaching. Yet there's
Hmm.
this idea that you have to already know yourself deeply to effectively do the role. I'm curious, how did that kind of play in with your own identity and knowing yourself at the beginning there?
Yeah, because I there were a lot of patterns that I did not recognize and that I did not know. I know myself as a winner. I know myself as somebody who has achieved lots and does great things at this point in my life. I'm 21 years old. I know myself as somebody who graduated high school with a 4.7 GPA, somebody who never got a B in college, somebody, like I know myself as that person. So stepping into the classroom and struggling mightily was foreign, or at least at that point I thought it was foreign. So I was like, no, I'm the person who sets his mind to it and accomplishes it, and I should be good. And I know that there's some people listening to the podcast and other teachers who have experienced that as well. a lot of teachers who I speak to, educators, they want to become a teacher because they were great students. They were like, I love learning. I just want to keep growing. I want to pour into the next generation. And then when we get there and we're not successful, now all of a sudden, imposter syndrome sets in and they say, oh, I'm actually not good at this. So because we misinterpret the struggle, and I believe that because I'm not doing this well and doing it effectively early on, it must mean I'm not cut out for this and I should be doing something else. So I didn't know that about myself, or I thought that I was the type of person who would always win. What I didn't realize was that I was always the person who would fight through the struggle long enough to win. And when I was in the midst of the struggle, I forgot that in every case, like high school was not easy at the beginning. Like college was not easy. I had to go through that adjustment. I just kept remembering the finish line, but I forget how much I struggled early in the beginning. So if I really would have known myself, I'm glad that you brought that up. If I really would have been able to know my identity, I would have been able to relax a little bit more and realize, oh, this is just part of the process. Like I struggle until I figure it out.
Yeah. It sounds like you did anyway kind of have that dig deep moment. I've got to persevere. I've got to be in this for the students. It sounds like there was a recognition of, like you said, a terrible teacher. It wasn't about the instructional strategies. It was, I'm here in front of students and I've kind of given up on them. I really appreciate you being open and honest about that. And I'm curious, when did it start to turn around? You were applying to these other jobs. When did you start to think differently, or even beyond the mindset? Was there something you started doing differently? Something concrete that started to change?
Yeah, so I'll say two things. First, I was asked not to come back. Like it wasn't. I told you it was obvious that I was not a good teacher. I was a terrible teacher. I gave up on students. They said not to come back for the second year. They weren't going to renew my contract. But if you know anything about education, it's hard to find math teachers sometimes. So, in that summer 2014, they reached back out and said, "Hey, can you give it one more shot?" And it's funny because I was actually, while I was thinking about it, I was at my wife's college graduation. She was a year behind me. And the commencement speaker was speaking to the graduates, but I was there in the audience. And one thing he said stuck with me. And he said, you're going to step out into the world. You're going to become, go whatever degree you got. Now you're going to go start working in that field. And he said, it's going to be tough at first, but I never want you to underestimate your impact. And he paused. And those words sat with me because now I'm a year into my career that he's talking to these college students. And I was like, man, he's speaking to me. Like, even though I feel like I'm not good enough, even though I feel like I'm inadequate, even though I feel like I'm not making a difference, you mean to tell me that I'm planting seeds that could eventually grow 10 years from now? You mean to tell me I can possibly be reaching somebody? So when I heard never underestimate your impact, and I said, man, there's a way that, I'm going to stick with it until I see what it turns into. So at first, to answer your question, it was the mindset shift. The mindset shift said, I'm going to be the type of person that figures this out. But the practical shift for me was hyper focusing on classroom management. That is the thing that I didn't know and that I know better now. So stepping into year 2 and year 3 and beyond, year 2 are really focusing on classroom management. And I believe that there are 3 pillars of classroom management. It's funny because it's in the book, the Impact Playbook, but I also was just recording a video about this, recorded some content about 10 minutes ago. So it's fresh in my mind. But there are 3 pillars of classroom management. 1, setting clear expectations, which is making sure that students know what is expected of them. Because if not, they're going to come up with their own ideas. And that's never what we want. 2 is having consistent consequences and desirable rewards. When students fall short of the expectation, what is it that is going to happen? It doesn't have to be damaging. It just has to be definite. Every time you fall short of the expectation, here's the consequence. I always like to think about it like a toll road. Tolls in North Carolina here were about 90 cents, $1.30. Nothing crazy, but every time you go past the toll road, it's going to flash. It's going to get that license plate. It doesn't have to be thousands of dollars. It just has to be just enough to be annoying. And desirable rewards, students need to feel accomplished when they do the right thing. And then step 3, the last pillar, the thing that actually makes them all run, is positive student relationships. Building student relationships, not by getting down to their level, but by helping build a know, like, and trust between the teacher and the students. When I was able to prioritize those 3 pillars, that completely shifted my classroom management model. That completely changed everything around. Year 2 was a lot better year. And year 3, I was teacher of the year for the first time. So in that 3 year span, I transitioned from a terrible teacher to a teacher of the year because of that one shift that I made.
Yeah, and relationships we know is such a huge part of it. You hear about classroom management; it's such a common topic for first year, second year teachers. I remember too. First year teacher, you go into your second year and everything seems different. You think, what was I doing the first year? There's just so many mistakes. I think that's a common experience, but it really seems for you there was kind of a turnaround moment. You're talking about rewards too, and you said those desirable rewards, and then you mentioned that students feel accomplished. But first when
Mhm.
you said it, I was thinking external rewards, but then when you started talking, it sounded more like it's that internal, intrinsic reward of the students feeling accomplished. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Is there a balance? Is there kind of how do you kind of strike a balance between those external and internal or extrinsic and intrinsic rewards?
Yeah, and I love that you use the word balance because that's exactly what it is. Some people shy away from external awards because they say, "Oh man, the students should be intrinsically motivated, intrinsically driven. They shouldn't be rewarded for the things they're supposed to do." I've heard things like this all the time, and I always think about it if I can use a football analogy. And I never like to use sports analogies broadly because not everybody's a sports person, but I'm going to use a football analogy. And if you're not a sports person, don't worry, you'll be able to track with me. The only thing you need to know is that the Philadelphia Eagles are the best football team. But other than that, what I noticed every year during the Super Bowl is that these young men, they work hard. They try, they blood, sweat, tears, like working hard all year, working out, waking up early, going to bed late. And when they win the Super Bowl, you see the emotion on their face. You see the tears falling down their eyes. You see the confetti falling from the stadium. And then they deliver a trophy. Like, is the trophy actually necessary? Do they do all this for a trophy? No, they do all this for that moment of looking out into the 80,000 people in the stands and saying, "I did this. I've dreamt of this since I was 7 years old." And here comes the commissioner with this 12-inch trophy, and they still feel accomplished by that. That is the best example I can use to think about how we balance intrinsic motivation with an external reward. That trophy, that Super Bowl trophy, is the commissioner saying to that team, "I see you, I support you, I acknowledge your effort." It's just a token that says that I see you. But intrinsically, that person's still saying, whether or not I got that, I feel good about myself. I didn't do it for the trophy, but the trophy was a nice added bonus. When I think about that in the classroom, your words, the way that you see students, the way that you support them when they do the right thing. I'm so proud of you. Congratulations. High five, fist bumps. Those go a long way, and it's not tangible. It doesn't cost any money or anything like that. But then it's also nice to have a little 5 minute extra recess as an extrinsic motivator, right?
Right, right. Beforehand, you acknowledge them, you see them, you say specifically what you saw that they did a good job in, and then they
Hmm.
understand what that reward is connected to. Yeah, it is nice to get those. I want to dig a little bit into your core message because hearing you speak, it's clear that your core message is very personal for you. It kind of follows your personal journey. And I'll say it again, I said it in the intro, but your core message is that new teachers don't quit because they can't teach. They quit because they stop believing they can. So break this down a little bit. What does this look like? What have you found in working with teachers? What's behind this? Because I know it goes beyond your personal experience. You've actually worked with a lot of educators and seen some patterns here.
Yeah. I do work with I work with a lot of educators, new teachers as well as veteran teachers, and a lot of teachers come from teacher education programs. Not everybody does. Some people transition from a different career or something like that. But it is not the fact that we weren't taught or prepared for the classroom, which is why we fail. Because as I mentioned, it doesn't matter how much you read in a textbook. When I stepped into the classroom, I was the type of I got A's in college. I got an A in classroom management. Daniel, I got an A in classroom management. I stepped into the classroom and students are doing a worm on the floor and throwing apples across the classroom. Like, it's not that we're not learned or that we don't have the ability to learn. As I mentioned, even in my story, which is a clear example, but it happens all over the nation, is that I stopped believing that I was a person that was capable of reaching those students. Not everything that you learn is going to happen in the teacher prep program. There's a lot of on the job training, a lot of hands on learning. But what ends up happening is that burnout sets in before confidence has a chance to activate. Because sometimes that confidence doesn't come until year three. Sometimes it doesn't come until year five. I like to say that confidence comes from the evidence of competence. Once I can see that I'm doing well, once I can see, oh, I do know how to manage the class, I can engage students, oh, I am learning how to differentiate. Once I have the evidence of competence in my skill application, then I am building that confidence. And the confidence is what we use to stick around. But when burnout sets in before confidence has a chance to activate, that might be 9 weeks in, and we're like, I can't do this anymore. So the way I like to put it, you asked the question, what does that really mean? To break it down for me, what does it mean that new teachers don't quit because they can't teach? They stop believing that they can. Belief is such a powerful tool, and I think it's one of the things that is unaddressed or not addressed enough. We address a lot of strategies, and we'll get to that in a minute. We address a lot of tactical moves, but how often do we address the internal belief system that I can actually do this? I wrap it up by saying this. When we were trying to go to the moon, all right, the U.S., they were trying to go to the moon. They wanted to get it there, be the first country to put their flag on the moon. They went to the scientist, Werner von Braun, and he was one of the brightest scientists of that era. And they asked him, what will it take for us to get to the moon? And everybody thought he was going to give some super high level quantum physics, rocket science answer as to what is going to take for us to land on the moon. And he just said 5 simple words. He said, the will to do it. Because if we have the will to do it, nothing is going to stop us from acquiring the skill necessary. And that's the same thing I believe with the classroom. I always say that when the will is unwavering, the skill is inevitable. When you have an unwavering will that says, I'm going to figure this out, I will show up for these students, I will understand how to manage the classroom, differentiate, whatever it is, you will acquire and apply the skills necessary to achieve that goal.
Yeah, I'm kind of hearing a chicken the egg thing here. So maybe kind of talk through it again. In on the one hand, if you build confidence, somebody might be more willing to try a new strategy that's going to have an impact on students and build their competence. On the other hand, what you said, that competence, which might not set in until year two, year three, you start developing, here's who I am as a teacher, here's my routines, here's what I do, here's some of my tools and strategies. You implement those, have an impact on students, and then that builds the confidence. So is there one that necessarily comes before the other, should come first? It sounds like you start with the confidence and the mindset, but acknowledging that other times it's the competence built first that influences the confidence. So curious, is this a cycle? Is it one comes first?
It's funny that you mentioned that. So, in the book, I actually mentioned the impact cycle, but I will correct you really quickly there, Daniel. There was used one word twice, and you miss a word that you were supposed to use. So, confidence used twice. You said confidence, then competence, then confidence. It's belief, then the competence than the confidence. So what actually starts is the belief. So it's not a chicken or egg. Sometimes we look at the confidence and say, if I have the confidence, then I'll build the skill. But to answer your question, well, where does confidence come from? Confidence comes from the actual ability to do the skill. So how do you get the ability to do the skill? It starts with belief. So that's where I'll say with the Warner Von Braun, like when I have the will and the belief and the grit that says, I'm going to figure this out. That's what allows you to acquire skills. Now that I'm acquiring and applying skills and I'm seeing levels of success, now I'm confident enough to continue moving forward. But it starts with belief.
I see. I appreciate that correction. And over the years, being a learner and then being a teacher, being an educator, and just reflecting on how we learn, something like that, where what I did was just rephrase. Let me see if I'm picking up what you're putting down. Let me rephrase it.
Yeah.
And I said it wrong, and then you were willing to speak up and say, actually, no, it's this. And, that's where we make meaning together. That's where those conversations don't in a classroom aren't always necessarily the teachers talking and students are listening. Sometimes you need that messy conversation. You need
Yeah.
people who are willing to put their ideas out there, even if they're not perfect, and then somebody willing to say, no, that wasn't quite right. Here's where you need to make an adjustment. And then the person willing to say, okay, great, I learned something. So I appreciate that clarification. I'm curious too in that messy classroom, with this worm example, because I know you bring it up because I know there was a student doing the worm in your classroom. You're not making that up. Um, do you see, like a effective classroom management? What does that look like? Does that look like, just to use this example, that students are never doing the worm? Or is there a world in which those relationships are there, there's those clear expectations, those consequences, rewards, everything that you set up, and there is space for a student to be doing the worm, or to have an outlet where they can share that part of themselves. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, every classroom is different. So there's no one way to say every classroom should be doing this. I will say, to stick with the analogy and the example, a student shouldn't be doing the worm unless doing the worm is expected at that time or allowed at that time. So when we state our expectations for what should happen in the classroom, some classrooms it's like there's complete silence. There should never be a word unless the teacher is speaking or unless you raise your hand first. Some classrooms are more collaborative and they're saying it's going to be a gentle hum for the complete 90 minutes because we're continuously talking back and forth, but it needs to be on task conversation. So that's why I say, when I say every classroom is completely different, if there's a student in your class doing the worm, if it's in alignment with the expectation at this time, like right now, if you got to get your wiggles out, you're allowed to do the worm and get back in your seat. And if a kid does that and gets back in the seat and is like, that's in alignment with the expectation, right? So it really is on the identity of the teacher and what identity they want to have in that classroom.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, talking about burnout in terms of teacher retention, every educator feels that. There's so many hard days, and there is that pressure, that expectation to perform and do well. And, it can be harder to observe the burnout in somebody else. And I'm curious, when you go in and help schools, when you go in and help a district with burnout, what do you look for? What do you listen for? How do you go about diagnosing the burnout?
Yeah. So it's one of those things that people make more complicated than it has to be. And I'm not sure why we do this, but I've been married for 11 years. I have a 7-year old, I have a 4-year old, and I've learned that sometimes it's better just to ask. Like sometimes it's better just to ask. So when you ask, how do I find the reason why teachers are burning out or leaving? I ask. So when we go to schools, I've been doing research over the last couple of years. My personal research through social media, amassed, a couple 100,000 followers. And I ask questions like, why are you leaving? Why are you quitting? What advice would you give to a new teacher? What was your tipping point? What was your breaking point? And I've aggregated the data over the years, again, working with districts, paying attention to what they're seeing on their teacher retention surveys, as well as asking teachers myself. So I've gotten thousands of responses, and the results may surprise you, but they probably won't. The number one reason why people are leaving is not financial. Although anytime I get in front of a camera and start talking on this topic, I say, please pay teachers more. Pay teachers more. We need it. But that is not the number one response. The number one and most often cited reason why teachers are leaving is because of lack of support from administration. That is the answer I get more than any other answer. So to answer your question, you only ask like, how do I be able to tell why teachers are leaving? I ask, and that's the answer that I get.
Yeah. Is there a point that you've noticed where teachers just can't come back from, where that belief, and you said it starts with belief, you corrected me, not the content, it starts with belief, where that loss of belief becomes too much and a teacher cannot come back from it? Is there a moment? And if so, how can you tell if somebody has passed that already?
No, there's not a moment where the lack of belief is irreversible or the lack of belief becomes too hard to reverse. I can cite dozens and dozens of examples. I can cite, Ray Kroc, who most people know him from McDonald's. He was a 52-year-old milkshake salesman when he ran into the McDonald's brothers and they opened the first franchise, right? I'm sure as a milkshake salesman, he at some point he started believing this is going to be it for me, right? Steve Harvey slept in his car for 3 years before he had an opportunity on the Apollo. I'm sure one of those nights in the car, he started believing like maybe this comedy thing is not going to work out for me. But it's never too late to shift the belief mindset in your mind. What I will say is I do think that there is a time in which the desire changes or the desire adjusts, and I'll break down what that means. I don't believe that the belief is something that can be irreversible, but I do believe that the desire might change. To kind of make it plain, my wife right now, she is a social worker. She's been a social worker for the last 12 years. And literally, yes, this morning or yesterday morning, we were speaking and she said, I want to go back to school and I want to become a nurse. And we started talking about what that looked like. And she said, it's going to take 3 years. I'm going to retire from the social work and my second career is going to be in nursing. She feels called in this life to help people, which is why she's been a social worker. She now has a desire to help people in another way. So when I look about teachers in the classroom, sometimes the desire can shift. And maybe I've been doing this for 11 years, 15 years. And you know what? I don't want to be a classroom teacher anymore. I have a newfound desire and I want to impact as an administrator, or I want to change careers completely. I want to go start a tutoring company. I want to start a nonprofit, kind of whatever it is. So it is okay to transition or to shift because now my desire of how I want to show up has changed. But that belief that I can do it still has to remain. So I don't believe that. I don't want people to say or to transition or to switch careers or to pivot or whatever because I no longer believe I am capable. My goal is to show up. The people that I serve, the teachers that I serve, are the teachers who still feel called, still have a passion, still want to impact, and they have a desire to remain and do so, but they've lost that belief that they can. Those are people who I feel called to impact. Those who have a different desire, who no longer want to be here in education, that's different. And I think that that's okay to pivot.
Yeah. It sounds like this goes beyond just telling somebody, just believe in yourself, right? A student is
100%.
struggling, you can't just tell them, well, try harder, right?
Right.
I'm hearing that the number one thing when you ask teachers, what do you need? What's going to make your life easier? They need and want support from administration. I feel like this is connected to the framework you developed, which I'm
It
curious
is.
about, system before strategy.
It is. It is.
Right, that it's more, it goes beyond just that self-belief. Someone can turn their own self-belief around, but if they're not supported by their admin, if they don't have the system support around them, it can only go so far. So talk a little bit more about this framework that you've developed.
Yeah, I'll break it down, and I'll try to be brief while also making sure you get everything you need. There's the full keynote curriculum, professional development trainings that we can talk about this literally for hours, because although my story is what started this journey, my story is not my only source of research, if that makes sense. So once I felt called to this direction, I started pulling in research and now I'm pursuing my doctorate in new teacher retention until like how do we really get this new teachers to stick around? And I developed a system before strategy framework, and it was built on really just one quote that I read in the book of from James Clear in the book Atomic Habits. And it's a great book. I'm sure you've heard of it. I'm sure others have as well. And in the book, he said, successful people have goals and unsuccessful people also have goals, which means the having of a goal is not the determining factor of whether or not somebody will be successful, because we don't rise to the size of our goals. We rest on the strength of our systems. And that's why I was like, there's a system that is necessary to achieve goals. There's got to be a system that is necessary for teacher retention as well. And when I started doing research and pulling it apart, I found that there are 3 drivers of new teacher retention. Oftentimes, myself included, I thought I needed to have strategies. I thought, listen, just give me the newest trend. Like, what's gonna work? Is it gonna be like what strategy can I find on TikTok or read on a book or see in a blog or like give me a strategy that's gonna turn my classroom around. And I've learned that strategies are not what helps a classroom be effective. But there's a system, and it's the same thing. So now, what's the system for new teacher retention? Here are the 3 drivers of retention when it comes to new teachers. Again, pulling research from all over. I can cite, Angela Duckworth and, all different types of people, of course, Carol Dweck and things like that, James Pink. And here are the three drivers. One, how leaders see them. Two, how teachers see themselves. And three, how the school feels to be a part of. And I'll break each of those down, but when those three areas are strong, attrition is not an issue and retention is guaranteed as long as the desire is that the teacher still wants to be there, right? So when I say how leaders see them, teachers, Rita Pearson said that students don't learn from teachers they don't like. I've adopted it for leaders and say teachers don't work for leaders they can't stand, right? Because if you don't see my potential, if you don't see that I can do this, if all you see is like when you come into my classroom for evaluation, if all you see are my gaps, right? If all you see is my performance, but you don't see the person, then I feel as if I'm constantly being evaluated and I don't feel safe and I don't feel comfortable. When teachers are saying I'm feeling a lack of support from administration, that is the number one reason. It's because a lot of times their administrators, it feels like when the administrator comes around, it feels more like an I gotcha than it feels like I gotcha. There's a difference, right? But when they feel like they're working with administrators who get them, who understand them, who see them, who value them, who support them, then that is a place where I'm willing that I want to stay. So when I do work with districts, my leadership development is how can we see teachers? It's funny. One of the principals I was working with recently, he said, before we started working together, he said every there's this new teacher that every time I walk into her classroom, she literally starts to cry, and I was like, that's an indicator that there's something there in your communication. So quick backstory on him, not too much. He came to education from business and he was just like, I'm a numbers guy. It's like I come in, I give her the numbers, I give her the evaluation. Because you see performance, you don't see the person. So I'm helping him see people. How do you communicate? How do you help people understand I've got your back? Yes, these are the goals, but I'm going to work with you to get there. We're going to work through it together, right? What does support look like? And some teachers some leaders miss that mark. And those are the schools that I work with. So one, that's that. Two, how teachers see themselves. If I spent the most time on this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it right now. But if I don't believe I'm capable, I'm not going to try. But teachers that believe that they are capable are teachers that continue to show up even in the tough times. They believe that this work is tough, but I'm tougher. So that's grit, that's mindset, that's resilience, that's all those things. And that is where I said earlier, I feel like we don't spend enough time as educators developing. We love PLCs over like strategies and we love professional development over practical moves and tactics, which are necessary. But how often do we develop the internal belief system of that teacher who needs to activate all of these programs that we're putting in place? We need them to understand that it's possible and they're capable. Lastly, school culture. How does a school feel to be a part of? People will consistently show up in places where they feel like they belong. And I think that we need to go much deeper than that. But again, I work with schools and districts to help identify or to help build a school culture of belonging. I'll wrap it up like this. There is a quote on DEIB. I used to be an associate director of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And we used to use this analogy of a party. We said diversity is making sure that everybody is invited to the party. Equity is making sure that everybody has access to enter the party, whether scholarships for tickets or something like that. Everybody has access to get into the party. Inclusion is making sure that everybody has a song on the playlist that represents their culture. And belonging is that everybody can dance as they feel like nobody's watching. The belonging piece of school culture is that people in your building should be able to feel free to dance as if nobody's watching. And if people in your building can't feel free to dance, then you don't have a culture of belonging. So those are three pillars: how leaders see them, how teachers see themselves, and how the school feels to be a part of. And when all three of those are strong, attrition is not a problem.
Okay, so if all three of those are strong, attrition is not an issue. What do you see? What gets in the way? What are some of the barriers that get in the way and work against teacher retention
Yeah.
or the school culture?
All of those things get in the way, just at different levels. So when I work with schools, I go through an assessment, and it's tiered like an MTSS system, where there's 3 tiers, and some schools are at the maintenance level where they're doing okay in 2 or 3 categories, or they might just be doing okay in all 3 categories. But we want to maintain so that attrition doesn't become a problem. So I help support those schools. Then in tier two, those are my recovery schools. Those are the ones who, like, 1 or 2 of those are really wavering. Teachers are saying, I don't feel supported. And that's when I work on driver number one. Or we're just seeing teachers calling out often, or we're seeing teachers, not implementing the things that they're learning in professional development. That's driver two. I'm saying they don't even believe that they're capable. They're just here, right? Or things like that. And then we have schools that are in crisis mode. That's tier three. That's when pretty much all 3 of these things are an issue. We've got teachers actively quitting. We've got a school culture that is toxic, right? We've got leaders who are, not having strong relationships with their teachers and staff and things like that. So I say most of my schools that I work with are actually tier two schools, and it's typically there are 1 or 2 drivers, and a lot of times it's driver two. I'm gonna be honest. A lot of time it's driver two, where is that I'm just noticing that lack of belief in the teachers, where a lot of blame is being put on the students, and as we know, kids are gonna be kids. But if the students would just behave better, if the students would just, if they would, like, but if you, I always ask them, could somebody else step in this classroom and manage it? Can somebody else understand how to engage these students? Could somebody else help these students grow? And the answer is always yes. And it's like, if somebody else can do it, that's just proof that it's possible. And if it's possible, you are capable. So I do a lot of work with helping build that internal resilience. And it's not just, like you said earlier, it's not just believe in yourself. No, I have practical strategies and practical tips, and we work through, affirmations. We work through building resilience. We speak a lot about growth mindset with students, the Carol Dweck system, but how often do we do mindset work with our staff, with our teachers? And it's very similar things. How do we get rid of the mind trash and replace it with the thoughts that we want to believe instead? So that's a lot of the work that I do. But yeah, most often it is driver number two that I'm seeing the issue with, where teachers are just saying, this is hard and I don't think I can do it.
Yeah, you might have mentioned, it might be one of the things you've mentioned, but if a school leader or a district leader is listening and wants to improve their teacher retention numbers, where would you suggest they start?
Where with me, or where period?
Well, it sounds like you do a lot of you talking to teachers and diagnosing, so I imagine that's where you would start. But is there, based on what you've seen, are there kind of some
Uh,
places to start for any leader? Just saying, I know my
yeah.
teachers are burned out. I've talked to them. We just don't know what to do, or we've tried to work on school culture. We've tried all these things, and but they
Yeah.
can't seem to get a handle on it. Where would you suggest they dig in?
Yeah, I would say to start with school culture. Even though you mentioned that they said we've tried that already, right? But try it again. Start with school culture. Ask for help if you need it. But the reason why is because that is the one that, even if the other two were not as strong, people will still stick it out. I like to think, again, just to use a sports analogy. I know we're not, sports analogy people. I told you earlier, Philadelphia Eagles, best football team. That's all you have to know. But I'm sure you also know that the Cowboys fan base is crazy. Like, the Cowboys fan base is ridiculous. They love them some Cowboys. You see them on license plates, you see their stickers, they're wearing Cowboys jerseys, and the Cowboys aren't even good. But they have a culture of belonging. I'm a Cowboys fan because my dad was a Cowboys fan. You hear things like that all the time. I'm a Cowboys fan because my grandfather and I used to watch the Cowboys every Sunday. I'm a Cowboys fan because even in the season, even though they haven't won a Super Bowl in 20 plus years, they are Cowboys fans because it's a culture of belonging. This is just what we do. So if we work on the school culture first, and they just feel like this is a place where I can belong. People are willing to struggle for the things that they care about. If I feel like I belong here, I'm going to show up, and we're going to complain about it together. But we're going to be together, and I'm going to be in the building because this is where my people are. This is where I feel like I belong. And when the culture is a culture that I feel like I can belong, then we can do some of that work on, again, the internal teacher, and then on those leaders to help them see teachers in a more positive light. So I would start with the school culture.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, kind of offhand, I get a strategy from TikTok. I get a strategy from these different places. More and more teachers are finding not just strategies, but they're finding that sense of belonging, that community in social media, in online groups, even in people they follow, and maybe they've never met them, but they're getting helpful strategies from somebody on TikTok, for example. What what do you I mean, just what do you think of that in terms of, advising school leaders to build that culture, build that sense of community in the building, at the same time honoring this sense of community that teachers are building elsewhere? Can those work together, or does building that culture elsewhere, does it work against teachers feeling like they belong in the classroom? Can can they
No,
belong to
yeah,
both? How is that working these days? Because it's something that's emerged maybe over the last 5 to 10 years of these
yeah.
groups online and social media.
So not only can they belong in both, but they should. For the sake of time, I'm not going to get into the full story, but I always tell this story when I'm talking about what support and what belonging actually looks like. And my daughter, she was when she was born 7 years ago now. She was in the NICU for 97 days, and we were there. My wife and I we were there, and it was a very tough season. 3 months in the hospital, I'm sure you can imagine. And my heart always goes out to people who have a different outcome than we did. But I can remember the doctor was a great doctor. The doctor did what she had to do, a couple of blood transfusions and surgeries and things like that. But the doctor was not our sole source of support, because there were times we were sitting at the hospital for 16 hours a day and we were hungry. The doctor wasn't sending us DoorDash. No, my parents were. All right. When we were sitting there in cold, the doctor didn't bring us blanket and pillows. The nurses did. I was in grad school at the time, and the doctor wasn't completing assignments on my behalf. That was my classmates. They were putting my name on some assignments. They're like, we got you, right? Because they knew what I was going through. But if I would have only relied on the doctor to make it through that season, I would have walked away saying the doctor didn't support me. But because I'm surrounded by community, I now feel supported. So I always say that you've got to have people that are ahead of you, beside you, and behind you. Ahead of you, there's people who are where you want to be, and they were where you currently are. So that you might be able to find that in your building, a principal, a mentor, teacher, something like that. But then on your right side, you need people who are going through the struggle with you. Sometimes those are the people in your building, but sometimes that is somebody on a social media group. It might be an art teacher from Milwaukee that connects with me because there's not another art teacher in my building. Like, I get it. We can bounce ideas off of each other. On the left side of you, you need people who are in your corner who are always going to be looking out for your best interest. I call it protecting your blind side. Like, those are people who are always making sure that you ate today, that you're not overworking yourself. And then behind you, those are people who you show up for so that you can be an inspiration too, because you know they're looking up to you. Maybe a student or a child or a younger mentor or mentee, right? So to answer your question, I can't have some people in my building. Maybe I have the grade level lead as the person that's ahead of me. Like, I look up to you, you're my mentor, I appreciate you. But also I am in a social media group where I have some people who are my right side people, and I've got a therapist who's my left side person. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's gonna take a whole community for teachers to feel surrounded, and that's when people feel surrounded, we don't hear them complain about not being supported.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I think we could talk for hours on this topic. I do want to give one final thought here. What is your message to teachers going into this school year?
Yeah, my message to teachers going into the school years, it's always the same, and it's that belief that I needed when I was stepping into that first year. You've you've heard it before. If at first you don't succeed, you're about average, right? You thought I was going somewhere else, right? You thought I was going somewhere else with that. If at first you don't succeed, you're about average. Like, most people don't succeed at first, right? There are not many times where the rookie of the year is also the MVP. Only one time I could think of. That was Derrick Rose in the NBA. Other than that, rookie of the year is somebody, and MVP is a completely different caliber because it takes some time to adjust. And I'm not just speaking to brand new, right out of college teachers. I'm talking about every year is a new year. We're stepping into new curriculum, new grade levels, new students we're going to have to deal with, new administrative staff. There's newness as we step into every year. There's going to be an adjustment period, and it's going to take some time for us to acclimate. But the reason why some teachers are highly effective while some teachers struggle is because the highly effective teachers struggled long enough to be good. And if you have that grit, tenacity, resilience on the inside, and belief that you've got what it takes, then you can consistently show up day after day after day until one day you look back and you can't even see how far you've come. You look back at the starting line and realize, wow, I made it a far way. All right. So just that belief that you've got what it takes. Remember, the boiling water that hardens an egg also softens the potato. Why? It's because of what they're made of. What is it that you're made of? What is going to happen when you face adversity? If you have the belief that you've got what it takes, nothing's going to stop you from becoming the teacher you've always wanted to be and making the impact our students deserve. You've got this.
Daryl, I can't thank you enough for sharing your personal stories, your expertise, your wisdom. If you're listening and you want to learn more, I imagine, Daryl, they should read the book, The Impact Playbook for New Teachers.
Check it
Um,
out.
and if you're listening and you are not part of Collab Ed, go to collabed.org and join the movement, join the community. We'd love to have you. Daryl, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Daniel. It was so much fun, man.